Nothing like changing a lens with an exposed sensor in a very windy environment. Hey, this is Andrew Bostansky, and today is an exciting day because Thypoch just released the 50mm f1.4 Simera, which I would consider a direct competitor to my 50 Summilux spherical. So I'd like to thank Thypoch for supplying the lens. I've had it in my possession for the last few weeks. It's been absolutely incredible to use. I actually just bought this SL2 pretty much in a rush to mount the Simera onto it because I really wanted to see how it resolved, because focusing with a 50mm f1.4 on a rangefinder is actually pretty tricky. I've had the 50 Summilux for 4 years now actually. I bought it from Camtec and I love it. It's my favorite lens, honestly. And I'm really, really happy to say that this Simera, just like the 35, is pretty much spot on when you compare it with the 50 Summilux or the 35 Summilux in the case of the 35. So incredible lens and really unique as well. So there are actually a ton of similarities between these two lenses. For starters, they both have one spherical element. They both have floating lens groups. They both have 8 elements, although the Summilux spherical has 8 elements in 5 groups, and the Thypoch has 8 elements in 6 groups: low dispersion glass, a high refractive index elements, like all the fancy bells and whistles that you would expect from a modern lens, and they render spectacularly. The 3D pop is there. There's tons of micro contrast. I'm honestly hard pressed to tell the difference between these two, and focusing it on a mirrorless camera like the SL just makes it even that much more fun to use because you can really appreciate the optical qualities. So right away, the build quality on the Simera is top notch. I hate to say this, but I prefer using it. I prefer the feel in general to my 50 Summilux. The 50 Summilux sphericals are notorious for this weird, I would call extinction. When you're focusing the lens, you can feel the floating elements, the floating lens group kick in. And whereas this Simera here is smooth as butter, Thypoch listened to all of us and they finally got rid of the infinity lock, and now we have an actual proper tab which feels really nice. It also seems like it's made of metal, and if it's not metal, it's a very nice hard plastic, but I actually think it is. So you have those red dots that come in to fill your depth of field scale like we've come to find in all the other Simeras. Got a declickable aperture. The lens is entirely internally focusing, so when you focus the lens, you see the group go back and forth internally, but the lens does not expand or contract, and I think that actually contributes to the overall ease of use that you have with this lens, whereas the Summilux, it actually goes back and forth, and the weight of the lens is put more onto the helicoid, which in turn makes the focus a little bit less fun to use. It's basically what you've come to expect from all the other Simeras with the Thypoch Simera. So declickable aperture, you got the indentation when you hit the 0.7 meter mark on your rangefinder. This lens is also going to be available native to all your other mounts like the Nikon ZF, Sony E, Fujifilm as well. All what they already have with the other Simeras, you're going to find them with this 50 Simera as well, but I like having an M mount lens because I shoot Leicas and I can adapt them onto every system that I have. So that being said, I would say that this lens is definitely more worthy to compare with the new recently released 50 Summilux spherical, the one that does focus closer. It reminds me a lot of it. It feels as girthy as that one. I personally prefer the dimensions of the original 50 Summilux spherical because it looks like a little beer can. I love it. It really, matches well with the Leica aesthetic, but the usability of the 50 Summilux, the new one, is, I would say, closer to this guy, but it feels a little bit more hollow, whereas this 50 Summilux spherical, especially if you go for the brass option, feels like a cannonball. The weight of the Simera feels very balanced. The whole lens is, the bulk of the weight is receded into the mount, so it balances really nicely on any camera you use. So let's just get into the optical quality, shall we? In the spirit of beers and cameras, stop for a beer, and now we're gonna do a quick bokeh test. So we got these string lights going overhead. I got the Simera on my Leica SL2S, and I got Gabriel filming me. So without looking like goofs too long, we're gonna just quickly start with the bokeh test. So I'm gonna focus on the Nikon logo here. Boop. And now I will take my 50 Lux spherical out of my product placement Overworth Leica M bag here. And we're gonna put this bad boy on. And we're gonna focus on the Nikon logo once more. Honestly, I almost think the Simera is slightly sharper than my Summilux spherical. At least this medium distance, which is where you're gonna be using these lenses. These are portrait lenses at the end of the day. At infinity, they're decent. I did notice that on the Simera, it did not suffer from the mid-zone dip that the 50 Summilux spherical is notoriously known for, which is really nice to see. So at 1.4, you can actually get a sharp image even at infinity with this guy. Stopping these down, they get ridiculously sharp. 2.8 f4, these lenses are as sharp as you want them to be. Once again, these are mainly portrait lenses because that's where you're gonna get that 3D pop the most out of them for, and they both exhibit the exact same 3D pop. Colors are also extremely similar. The chromatic aberration on both are very similar. Just now when I was focusing with the 50 Summilux on the Nikon logo on Gabriel ZF, I hit the contrast and there's just a bit of chromatic aberration before and after. These lenses are extremely similar, which is really nice for the Simera because this lens is going to ring in at a quarter to a fifth of the price of this lens. And one thing I really like I already mentioned, is the fact that this lens is internally focusing. And you just have to be mindful of the fact that because the elements are breathing back and forth, and you can see all that milled aluminum inside of here, that I feel like there's going to be a suction effect. So to really weather seal this lens better against the elements, against dust, rain, whatever, you're going to want to put a filter on this. All right, so now let's do a little infinity test. So I'm gonna focus on our little pink friend hanging off the building. This is the 50 Summilux spherical now. Punching in directly onto the guy. Yeah, it's decently sharp. It's kind of hard to figure out exactly when we're perfectly aligned, but I stopped at f8 here, as you can see. So anything further than that, you're gonna start hitting diffraction. But this is a lens that stops out in half stop increments. Simera here doesn't do that. It does exactly what all the other Simeras do, which at this point I've just come to appreciate from all the Thypoch Simeras. And the fact that you go from every aperture indentation from 1.4 to 5.6 in third stop increments, and then after 5.6 it's half stops, because from f8 to f16 you're in full stops. So I'm used to it, but I have to look at my lens, whereas as you just saw with the 50 Summilux, I don't have to. I know, 1, 2, we're at the next stop. There doesn't seem to be much of a focus shift. Even at close distances, I don't really notice much, maybe a tiny bit backwards, but both these lenses are extremely similar. I mean, that has a lot to do with the fact that when we're looking at these lenses on paper, they are close. I've never been able to replicate the results that I can get from my 50 Summilux spherical. It's always been this benchmark lens. Even the Zeiss Otis, which is like the holy grail of Zeiss lenses, doesn't have the same bokeh quality that the 50 Summilux spherical has. But Thypoch have managed to come very, very close to it. I'm looking at my test shots all the time with the Thypoch Simera here, and I'm having a really hard time differentiating the two, which speaks tons for just how good this lens is. So unfortunately, I don't have any shopping carts at my disposal, but I do have bikes. So starting with the 50 Summilux over here, and now we'll get a taste for the field curvature and just the bokeh in general. God, they're so close. It's so similar. Good job, Thypoch. Very good job. The Simera has 14 aperture blades instead of 9 on the Summilux. The Summilux spherical version 2 has 11. So 14 is definitely the winner, no matter what. At the end of the day, the bokeh balls remain very circular and very undefined, with obviously a little bit of outlining at 1.4. Both these lenses have a tiny bit of outlining, but the bokeh never becomes very distracting on either of these. Although the Thypoch comes close, I'm noticing when I'm focusing that it's not exactly there. People have said in the past that the 50 Summilux spherical is apochromatic because I don't see that much bokeh fringing. That's where the Summilux definitely has an upper hand. A lot more people suddenly, but if we look up here, yeah, it's a little bit busier. When when you're starting to make the lens struggle a bit, it's a tiny bit busier on the Simera in the foliage up here. At medium distances, so I would say below 3 meters, around 3 meters, let's say, they're pretty much even. The 50 Summilux spherical has a creamier bokeh, just by a little bit. If it's worth the extra thousands of dollars, that's your call to make. So we're in the sun, so let's do a little flare resistance, shall we? I'm not seeing any flaring coming in here from the Simera. So it seems like actually this 50 Summilux spherical actually flares a bit more. Yeah. Than the Simera. That's crazy. So the Simera actually has better flare resistance. Another nod towards the Simera. And how much is the Simera? Not much. So we're gonna focus on this dumpster over there, and I'm going to code this Simera as a 50 Summilux spherical. Let's go. Focus on the garbage. As you can see, the depth of field is pretty narrow on the Simera, and honestly, at 1.4 it's not the sharpest, but what I want to show you is how it codes as a Leica M to just a 50 millimeter. And now we'll put on the old 50 Summilux aspheric. Do the exact same shot. See, the adapter recognized it right away as the 50 Summilux spherical. Pretty damn close. The Summilux has always had this kind of like glowy built-in halation filter into it that this Thypoch doesn't have. That also adds to the character of the 50 Summilux, right? There's a very low contrast look to the 50 Summilux spherical. The Thypoch seems to be keeping up closely, but this Thypoch renders a bit cooler, and that might have a lot to do with the multi-coatings on this lens. And as we saw, it is more flare resistant. So, you know, you win some, you lose some, but overall, they're very similar. And I could see the same amount of chromatic aberrations on the pale that's sticking out there on both these lenses. The biggest differentiating factor at the end of the day is the fact that when you shoot the 50 Summilux spherical on a Leica M camera, you have the vignette compensation built in. So what I just did by shooting at that dumpster and coding this Simera as a Leica Summilux is I got rid of the vignetting, and therefore we can really appreciate the similarities of these two lenses. Freaking dope, honestly. Great job, Thypoch. If you're looking for a 50mm 1.4 lens for your Leica M mount camera or mirrorless camera, this is definitely the one to get. It is sharp throughout the range, even in the edges, for much less than the Summilux. Pretty cool.